Our scripture tonight, we have two. We have Psalm 32, and then we have a passage from 2 Corinthians. Psalm 32 provides instructions on the means and results of confession. The writer of the psalm testifies to the relief, both physical and spiritual, that came to him when he went to God and simply told the truth. And then in our passage from 2 Corinthians, we learn that reconciliation starts from God, reaches through Christ, so through us to all the world and back to God again. Listen for the word of God.
From Psalm 32. Count yourself lucky. How happy you must be. You get a fresh start. Your slate's wiped clean. Count yourself lucky. God holds nothing against you, and you're holding nothing back from him. When I kept it all inside, my bones turned to powder. My words became day-long groans. The pressure never let up. All the juices of my life dried up. Then I let it all out. I said, I'll make a clean breast of my failures to God. Suddenly, the pressure was gone. My guilt dissolved. My sin disappeared. These things add up. Every one of us needs to pray. When all hell breaks loose and the dam bursts, we'll be on high ground, untouched. God's my island hideaway, keeps danger far from the shore, throws garlands of hosannas around my neck. Let me give you some good advice. I'm looking you in the eye and giving it to you straight. Don't be ornery like a horse or mule that needs bit and bridle to stay on track. God defiers are always in trouble. God affirmers find themselves loved every time they turn around. Celebrate God. Sing together, everyone. All you honest hearts, raise the roof. And now from 2 Corinthians. Because of this decision, we don't evaluate people by what they have or how they look. We looked at the Messiah that way once and got it all wrong, as you know. We certainly don't look at him that way anymore. Now we look inside, and what we see is that anyone united with the Messiah gets a fresh start, is created new. The old life is gone. A new life burgeons. Look at it. All this comes from the God who settled the relationship between us and him and then called us to settle our relationships with each other. God put the world square with himself through the Messiah, giving the world a fresh start by offering forgiveness of sins. God has given us the task of telling everyone what he is doing. We are Christ's representatives. God uses us to persuade men and women to drop their differences and enter into God's work of making things right between them. We're speaking for Christ himself now. Become friends with God. He's already a friend with you. The word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God. From 2005 to 2009, I was blessed to be in seminary at Eden Theological Seminary in Webster Groves. I can't tell you what a treat that was in my 40s to be able to go back to school for something I really had a passion for. Eden is a United Church of Christ seminary, and they are approved to prepare clergy for numerous denominations. So I had an opportunity to go to school with people from a lot of different denominations. And within my graduating class, there were around 60 of us. Our ages went from 21 to 63, and we were pretty evenly distributed. And it was a really wonderful experience. It was a wonderful time to learn. We learned from the professors and from the readings and the writing and the research from field ed, and we learned a lot from each other. I learned a lot from fellow students, and it might have been during a group project or during a class discussion or just over lunch. When we got closer and closer to graduation, there were discussions on what kind of church you hoped you might be serving in your first time out. Now the thing is, the United Methodist Church, as you know, is an episcopacy, and the bishop appoints us wherever we're going to end up. I knew I would end up somewhere in Missouri. But most of the people that I was going to school with were on a call system, which, to put it very simply, it's a lot like sending out your resume, and if somebody wants to interview, you go interview and you might get the job and you might not. So in those ways, some of those folks had a little more control, at least over where they sent their resumes, and they had some specific ideas of where they wanted to serve. Some people were really interested in rural ministry. Some people were really interested in urban ministry. But there was this contingent of people, always at Eden, but in my class certainly, who were very outspoken about a particular kind of church that they wouldn't want to serve. And the particular kind of church that they wouldn't want to serve was any church that was in an area of affluence. Okay? A church that was in an area of affluence. What they were saying was they didn't want to serve a church that was full of affluent people. What? What? That made no sense to me. I mean, does that surprise you? I mean, here we are in an area of affluence, you know. This was my home church, for Pete's sake. Manchester is what launched me into ministry. Manchester is where I found my faith. And in essence, what some of these folks were saying, and they were saying it forcefully, this is the kind of church they wouldn't want to serve in. Well, I mean, okay, so I just pushed back a whole lot. You know where you don't listen enough and you just talk too much? Well, I just didn't like that at all. So I just started telling them what I thought about that. But I just kept hearing it. Did you hear that in your seminary?
Not quite as much, but...
Not quite as much, but she did. Yeah, well, Eden's a little unique. But anyway. But I realized, you know, after a little while, I realized I probably needed to listen. If there were enough people that felt like this, I probably needed to listen. As much as I love this church and the people here, if there were that many people that felt that way, then I needed to pay attention to what that was about. And what was interesting to me is that the folks who had an issue with churches in areas that are well-to-do, many of the people, when I talked to them, they actually grew up in churches like that. It wasn't that they didn't have experience in those churches. They had a problem with churches like that because when it came right down to it, what they felt was that churches in areas of affluence, the people in them really don't know how much they need God and how much they need each other. Okay? People who have pretty much everything they need don't realize how much they need God and how much they need each other. And really, I think what a lot of these students were wanting to do, they were very much wanting to end up in a church where they were needed from the get-go. They had done mission work. They had been in areas where there was great need. And they saw no reason why not to just be serving in those areas to begin with. One of the things that they had to say about churches like Manchester, and please, please, I love Manchester, please, please, please. I don't want anybody getting angry with me. I'm not pointing fingers. What I'm saying is, this is a wonderful place, and I think it really helps for us to at least hear this and understand this a little bit, because this might be the way people see us a little bit. I think it's just good to pay attention to. People who live in an area like this tend to be fairly independent and competitive. I mean, you ended up in West County somehow. You're probably pretty independent and fairly competitive. And folks that I went to school with didn't necessarily feel that that worked in the church. Well, I have no problem with competition. A little healthy competition, I have no problem with that at all. I mean, where would we be without competition in sports? And frankly, in the workplace, in my first life as a graphic designer, I didn't mind competition. I remember when I was in my first job and I'd been there for about a year and I was getting bored, you know? I needed a new job somewhere with a little more competition. And so I sent out some resumes and I got an invitation to an interview with an art director who was incredibly talented. He showed me some of the work that his department was doing and stuff, and I knew. As soon as I talked to him and looked at his work, I thought, that is where I want to work. That's where I want to work. It took about 3 months, and it took 3 interviews to get this job. I have no idea how many people he was interviewing, but the man could not make up his mind. So, the 3rd interview, I got a phone call, and he wanted us to meet me at a restaurant. That's where our last interview was going to be, and I thought, listen, if the company's buying me dinner, they're probably offering me the job. So I met him at this restaurant, and we had dinner. We finished dinner. We're drinking coffee, and I mean, he's going on and on and on about the company and about the department and about where they're headed. I mean, he's just filling me in and filling me in and filling me in, and finally he says, knowing all of this, are you still interested in the job, in the position? Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And he said, okay, there's one more thing I want to make sure you understand, and I want to make sure you agree with. He said, Stephanie, we design to win awards. And I thought, you know, somebody else might have found that statement intimidating, but not me. I thought, bring it on, bring it on. I'd already had a little success with my design work. Heck yes. Bring it on. That sounds great to me. So I got the job, and I mean to tell you, glory days, right? We were competing against big agencies and big design studios with big budgets. That's not what we had. And I'm telling you, we were winning. And man, did that feel good. A little competition can inspire you to do your best work. Work of excellence. Why wouldn't we want to do that? So, we're winning awards. We're winning awards. And it's just, you know, you're in the limelight. You're on the pedestal for that moment. And the thing is, it's only supposed to be for that moment. But if you really keep doing well, and I was working with people who were really good and we were really doing well, we ended up on that darn pedestal quite a bit. And after a while, it feels so good, you think you might just live there. This is the place to be. And actually, a pedestal for a human being is a pretty dangerous place to be. So then what happens? I know you guys live in West County, most of you. You know what this is like. You know what it's like. You're good at what you do. So what happens? Oh, you're honored more and you are promoted. You move up in the ranks, right? And you make more money, right? Right? You do. It's lonely at the top, and I think a lot of you probably know that. I think there's a lot of people in West County that know that. It's lonely on top of a pedestal, and it's lonely at the top. When you keep getting promoted and promoted and promoted, you might be making good money, but it can get awfully, awfully lonely. The thing is, we don't recognize it at the time. We just keep going for it. We love to be told, we need to hear that we are the best, the brightest, the smartest, the fastest, the strongest, the best looking in whatever way you compete. We love hearing that. It makes us feel good about ourselves. And the problem is that after a while, we may start to feel like that's really all we have to offer. And if we're not getting that kind of feedback, then maybe we're not as loved as we should be. This is the problem with competition. This is the problem with competition. Listen, if we're competing, I can't help you. If we're competing, you can't help me. If we're competing, we cannot help each other. If we're competing and there's something I need to share, I can't share it with you. If there's something wrong in my family, if there's something broken, if I'm flawed, if there's something really necessary for me to share with another person, I won't share it with you if we're competing. If I have a sense of competition, you have a sense of competition, I'm not going to share with you. Why is that? Because it makes me vulnerable. And I'll be darned if I'm going to make myself vulnerable to a competitive person. And this is even in the church. We spend an awful lot of time trying to convince each other that everything is great, that everything is fine, that we don't have any problems. And frankly, you know, we had a senior pastor here at one time who used to say, there's a broken heart in every pew. I recently mentioned that to our district superintendent, and he said, gee, Stephanie, there's a broken heart in every chest. It's true. We need to be able to be vulnerable. We need to be able to share. We need to be able to be real. You know, those of us who have enough resources, we don't need to ask for help. If we need something, we buy it. If we need something done, we hire to get it done. If anything, we're the ones who want to give the help. That's a good thing, except that we're never wanting to receive. We can even get competitive in our mission work. We know we can do this. We may get to a place where we recognize just how critically important it is to get outside the walls of the church and offer our time and our talent and our resources. And we are so ready to give. But there's some part of us that just cannot believe that the people we are serving could possibly have anything we need in return. And that's the hump we have to get over. Mother Teresa, in her book, A Simple Path, wrote the following, and she had just been to the United States. And when she uses the word West, it's with a capital W. The greatest disease in the West today is being unwanted, unloved, and uncared for. We can cure physical diseases with medicine, but the only cure for loneliness, despair, and hopelessness is love. The poverty in the West is a different kind of poverty. It is not only a poverty of loneliness, but also of spirituality. There's a hunger for love as there is a hunger for God. If you were here last week, you remember we talked about spiritual hunger and thirst and our need to be able to identify that within ourselves. Because underlying all our independence and all our competitive nature and all of our resources is a very, very deep need for a loving relationship with God and a loving relationship with others. And how many people do you know don't have either of those, or have one and not the other? You got to understand, this is the way God designed us. We are made for relationship. Jesus said, when he was asked, what's the greatest commandment? He said to love God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind and all your strength. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. We are made to love God and to love neighbor. That is how we are whole. And we've been talking about the fact that we're in the season of Lent. Every one of us has something going on inside of us that needs to change. You know, John Wesley, founder of Methodism, used to talk about we are heading toward perfection, but we never arrive at it in this life. We need to keep putting one foot in front of the other in this spiritual journey. So some of us have big stuff going on inside of us that needs to change. And others of us, we're at a place right now where maybe it's just a little nagging something, but we really need to take care of it. And we talked about the need to have courage and just go before God and tell the truth. To just be able to do that. See, we don't have to do this alone. We don't have to face these obstacles in our life alone. I love this version of Psalm 32. It's from the Message. Count yourself lucky. How happy you must be. You get a fresh start. Your slate's wiped clean. Count yourself lucky. God holds nothing against you, and you're holding nothing back from God. You're telling the truth. And remember, a couple weeks ago, we talked about a contrite spirit. You're telling the truth, and you are admitting that you need God's help to make these changes in your life. The psalmist goes on to say, when I kept it all inside, my bones turned to powder, my words became day-long groans, the pressure never let up, all the juices of my life dried up. Most of us know what that's like. We've been through something before where we were in a lot of pain, and we just didn't know how to get through it. We can feel like that. day-long groans. Bones turn to powder. And yet, when we have the courage, when we have the desire to go before God and just tell the truth, it can make such a difference. Then I said, I'll let it all out. I'll make a clean breast of my failures to God, and suddenly the pressure was gone, my guilt was dissolved, and my sin disappeared. See, that almost seems too good to be true. But the fact of the matter is, when you go to God with a contrite heart and you know you're forgiven by God, your guilt really, the bad feelings, really, the day-long groans, really, the bones turn to dust, really, it's gone. And the healing begins. And it is the most miraculous thing. That is from Psalms. That is from the Old Testament. And then we move into the New Testament, and we move into this letter from Paul, 2 Corinthians. And there's just a part here. It's so similar. Listen to this. Now we look inside, and what we see is that anyone united with the Messiah gets a fresh start, is created new. The old life is gone. A new life burgeons. Look at it. All this comes from the God who settled the relationship between us and him and then called us to settle our relationships with each other. It's the same thing. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years later, it's the same thing. And it's the same thing today. In 2013, it is the same thing today. We need to let down our guard. We need to tell the truth. We need to admit brokenness, and we need to ask for help. And when I do this and I start with God, I feel so much better. And then I listen, and God usually directs me to another human being that I trust to do the very same thing, to let down my guard, to tell the truth, to admit to the brokenness, and ask for help. And that is when the most amazing healing will begin in your life. But you can't be afraid. And you got to give up the competitive nature, at least for a while, and the strong sense of independence. And you got to let yourself be embraced by God and by people that you trust. And when you do that, you will be reconciled. And what does that mean? It is the most wonderful thing you have ever felt. And many of you have been through this, and you know what this is about. To be reconciled is to have friendships and health and life restored. To be reconciled could be to have a fresh start or a second or third chance to get it right. To be reconciled is to be forgiven by God, forgiven by yourself, forgiven by others. To be reconciled is for colors to be brighter, food to taste better, music to sound sweeter. To be reconciled is to go to bed at night with a clean conscience, to sleep soundly, to wake up refreshed. To be reconciled is to be hopeful and to be content and to be at peace. And when I think of those of us or those people that we may know, who we know make a life of being independent and competitive, bless their hearts. Is it really better to be admired from afar or to be loved deeply, up close and personal? One way we draw very close to God and with each other is through Holy Communion. We have another opportunity to receive the sacraments. We have been doing this every Saturday during the season of Lent. After consecration and when you are directed by the ushers to come up and receive, unless you have something specific that you want to talk to God about, which is great. If you're open to suggestions, I would ask that you think about asking God for either ongoing courage for changes you've already made in your life, or the courage to make the change that you know needs to happen.